Good afternoon, and thank you very much for that introduction. It is both a privilege and a responsibility to address you here. My focus today is a subject that is regional in geography, but global in consequence: the Islamist radicalization in Afghanistan and Pakistan and its transformation into a transnational security threat. While many in the West are preoccupied with the infiltration of Islamist ideologies into our own democratic institutions, in schools, universities, civil society, and politics, the epicenter of this ideological and operational threat lies in South Asia. US forces left behind military equipment worth more than $7 billion, including 40,000 military vehicles and more than 300,000 individual weapons when they left Afghanistan 4 years ago. The Taliban takeover has empowered jihadis all over South and Central Asia. There, the Taliban, the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, the so-called Islamic State Khorasan province, and militant separatist groups like the Baluch Liberation Army are not only consolidating control over territory, but also exporting ideology, expertise, and violence far beyond their borders. Their violent sectarian interpretation of Islam endangers local minorities, represses women and liberal Muslims, and fools the transnational jihadist networks that have for decades challenged state authority and civil order in every corner of the globe. My talk will examine how these groups consolidate power, enforce their ideology, and contribute to the global Islamist threat, and what this means for democratic societies. To understand the current landscape, we must start in the 1980s. During the Jihad against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, armed struggle was not merely a tactical necessity, it became normative. Jihad became the dominant moral and political vocabulary of Islamist actors. President Reagan invited the Mujahideen to the White House in 1983. When the Soviet troops withdrew and the Afghan regime collapsed, the Mujahideen dispersed. Many returned to their countries of origin, others to the Muslim diaspora in the West, bringing with them combat skills, militant networks, and an ideological commitment to armed Islamism. By the early 1990s, these veterans were building cells across the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia. They laid the groundwork for the globalization of terror, a trend Al-Qaeda exploited to maximum effect in the late 1990s and early 2000s. Fast forward to today, while Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda central leadership, and the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria have been degraded militarily, the Taliban have emerged as perhaps the only major Islamist actor whose recent trajectory can be called a success story. That success, the re-establishment of their Islamic Emirate in 2021, has been watched closely by other militant groups, many of whom now look to Afghanistan for inspiration, ideological legitimacy, and even training. After the US withdrawal in August 2021, the Taliban quickly consolidated their control over Afghanistan. The regime reinstated a rigid interpretation of Sharia law, reversing 2 decades of fragile progress in human rights, governance, and education. Women have borne the brunt. Banned from secondary and higher education, excluded from most employment, silenced in public life, and subjected to restrictive dress and mobility codes. Minority communities like the Shia Hazara have faced targeted violence, often in the form of bombings or mass shootings. Here lies a paradox. Under the previous Afghan government, corruption was endemic. Law was often whatever the Western project donor was willing to pay for, and government officials became, in effect, managers of corruption. The Taliban, by contrast, have established an administration that many Afghans describe as efficient and consistent. Justice is swift, decisions are enforced without exemptions for the wealthy or politically connected, and bribery is far less tolerated. While many citizens disagree with the harshness of the law, they acknowledge that it applies equally to all. The Taliban brought law, security, stability, and most important, peace, which give the Taliban a measure of legitimacy. Despite assurances in the 2020 Doha Agreement, the Taliban continue to host elements of Al-Qaeda and provide sanctuary for foreign fighters including Uzbeks, Tajiks, Uyghurs, and Chechens. The presence of such actors, coupled with the Taliban's proven capacity to outlast a superpower, has transformed Afghanistan into a symbol of victory for Islamists worldwide. Neighboring Islamic Republic of Pakistan currently ranks second in the Global Terrorism Index. The Pakistani Taliban, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, has emerged as the fastest growing terrorist organization globally. Last month, in July 2025 alone, over 100 terrorist attacks were carried out in Pakistan, killing more than 200 people. This translates to an average of more than 3 terrorist attacks every day, a staggering escalation compared to 3 years ago when similar figures were recorded annually. So 3 years ago there was a peace agreement with the Taliban. We have had around 100 terrorist attacks a year. Now we have 100 terrorist attacks every month. For years, Islamabad distinguished between good Taliban, those it considered legitimate stakeholders in Afghanistan, and bad Taliban, meaning those engaged in anti-state violence inside Pakistan. That policy has now collapsed. The government has redesignated the TTP as Fitna al-Khawarij, rebellion of the outsiders, stripped its leaders of religious honorifics, and labeled them heretics whose actions contradict Islam's true essence. In Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, however, the Pakistani Taliban are primarily seen not as an oppressive force, but a movement of emancipation. They provide arms to anti-government activists. They provide training and exploit popular demands for self-administration, local legal authority, and the removal of federal security forces. This support base complicates counterinsurgency efforts and underscores the deep governance crisis in Pakistan. A similar rebranding has occurred for the Baluch Liberation Army, now referred to as Fitna al-Hindustan, implying that India is behind the insurgency in Balochistan. These changes are not merely semantic, they signal a decisive policy shift toward confronting all militant groups without the former strategic distinctions. A year ago, the group blew up the railway bridge in Bolan, that is the image, destroying the main rail connection between Balochistan and Iran. In March this year, the Liberation Army hijacked the Jaffa Express train transporting 380 armed soldiers. They detonated explosives in 2 tunnels before and after the train, before opening fire at the train. If somebody has said 2 years ago that it's possible that the separatist Baluch Liberation Army would conduct a terrorist act on that scale, everybody would have said it's not possible. But now they cooperate with the Islamic State, they cooperate with the Taliban, and they have the means to do really large-scale attacks. The Islamic State Khorasan province, founded in 2015, has capitalized on local dissatisfaction with both the Taliban and the Pakistani state. After the fall of Kabul 4 years ago, most of the elite forces within the Afghan National Army and the intelligence services, trained, equipped and funded by the West over 2 decades to combat the Taliban, could not be integrated into the ranks of the Taliban. To continue their fight and job, many instead joined the Islamic State Khorasan province, which has since become the largest, most professional and most operationally active branch of the Islamic State franchise worldwide. Only recently have European countries begun evacuating and resettling these individuals. The operational footprint of the Islamic State Khorasan has expanded far beyond Afghanistan and Pakistan. In Vienna last year, in August, Austria, There were the foiled suicide bombings at a Taylor Swift concert, with a 15-year-old Syrian refugee in Frankfurt an der Oder acting as a translator for bomb-making instructions to the North Macedonian Austrian Beran A, who was building the bombs without any knowledge of Arabic. Beran consumed Islamic State Khorasan propaganda via Telegram. Last year in March, we had the Crocus City Hall mass shooting and slashing attack near Moscow, leaving around 150 people dead and 600 wounded. It was the deadliest terror attack in Russia since 2004. The picture shows the concert hall before and after. In Kerman, Iran, in January last year, there were bomb attacks killing about 100 and injuring nearly 300 at the 4th anniversary of the death of General Soleimani, the deadliest attack in Iran since 1978. Beyond large-scale terror attacks, there's been a sharp rise in lone actor terrorism. Examples from Germany since last year include the attack on Michael Stürzenberger, who was stabbed by Salman Atai, 25-year-old Afghan refugee, during a mass stabbing attack at the Citizens Movement Pax Europa rally in Mannheim in May, which left a police officer killed. In August last year in Solingen, there was a knife attack at the Festival for Diversity, where a Syrian asylum seeker killed 3 and injured 8. The attack has been attributed to Islamic State Khorasan province influence. In Aschaffenburg in January this year, a 28-year-old Afghan who was under an obligation to depart injured 3 and killed 2 in a knife attack on a kindergarten group. And in Munich in February this year, a 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker drove a car into a group of 30 protesters, injuring 39, killing 2. These examples illustrate Islamic State Khorasan's ability to mobilize operatives across continents, including minors, and to use online communication to coordinate attacks. The Islamic State Khorasan province views the Taliban as insufficiently radical and accuses them of compromising with infidels. The competition between the two fosters ever-escalating brutality as each seeks to demonstrate ideological purity through violence. Propaganda is key. South Asian jihadist groups disseminate content in Pashto, Dari, Urdu, Arabic, Russian, and English. This multilingual approach ensures their narratives reach both local recruits and alienated youth in Western diaspora communities. Militants from Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe travel to Afghanistan and Pakistan for training before returning to their home countries. These networks also facilitate the smuggling of arms, funds, and digital expertise, creating a resilient infrastructure for transnational terrorism. The threat to Western democracies is multi-layered. Homegrown radicalization, inspired by jihadist propaganda online, refugee infiltration, where extremist elements are embedded in migration flows, institutional influence, where Islamist lobby groups downplay or obscure the extremist threat, hampering preventive policies. Afghanistan and Pakistan stand today not merely as theaters of local insurgency, but as hubs in a global jihadist network. The Taliban's endurance, the TTP's expansion, and the Islamic State Khorasan's globalized brutality form a dangerous triad capable of projecting violence across continents. Their ideology knows no borders, and neither should our response. Confronting this challenge requires sustained vigilance, coordinated action, and the moral clarity to defend democratic values against theocratic absolutism. If we fail to address both the immediate security threats and the deeper structural causes of radicalization, we risk facing an ever more entrenched and far-reaching wave of Islamist extremism, one that will be harder, costlier, and bloodier to defeat. Thank you.